Hello, friends. The world is continuing in its adventurous, mysterious craziness these days. It is September 10th, 2021, and I'm in America. But I have a feeling that wherever you are in most of the world is being shaken up, if you will, or the old paradigms are breaking down, and they're breaking down very quickly. And we can see that on the outside just by what's been happening over the past year and a half in the world, and changes in public health, changes in restrictions on society, on travel. I think we all are well aware of what's happening by now. And for me, that, what's happening in the world is really a projection of what's happening in the most internal space within each one of us, right? And some of us are capitalizing on the opportunity by allowing the dissolution of the old and discovering the birth of the new. Not just discovering, there's a process of discovering what wants to be birthed on the other side of that paradigm. And then there's a process of mastery, so that there's a potential to consciously birth what is outside that paradigm. And that's what my focus is. I want to talk about a particular topic that I feel is really relevant to that discussion, and kind of weave in some of the things that are happening in the environment with the test and the challenge and the call to meet the new within ourselves. So, it never ceases to amaze me how the craziness in the world is parallel to the exit of that craziness through kind of like the exit of the Matrix, through the realization of what we are, right? And that's a spiral, so that there are levels of realization of the self. But there comes a point along that spiral where the realization, and let me say that along that spiral, with each level of realization of what I is, what the self is, and it's not a conceptual discussion, right? So if you know me, or if you have worked with me, I'm always going to ask you to come back to all levels of being in that exploration: the physical sensations, the emotions, the way the movement wants to happen, both in and through your body and in the environment around you, thoughts and emotion, the inclusion of all aspects of our consciousness without the repression of any aspect, or the inclusion of the repression, allowing the repression to be there for as long as it wants to be there. And the backdrop of stillness can precipitate that. So stillness is just a word for what is completely calm or inactive. It's a backdrop for the activity. It allows the activity to appear in the consciousness in a way that can be felt and seen and heard and allowed, right? That backdrop, it's like having a black backdrop to a play of white, or a play of movement. And when both of those are there, with the acceptance and allowance and surrender, what happens is any separation between what's still into what's completely unmanifest and what is moving, what's active, what's apparent, what can be sensed, they start to integrate into the consciousness. And the structure of consciousness itself, the structure of the psyche, begins to transmute to be the vehicle for the expression of that integration. And that creates a different kind of human than what we've been before. So the invitation now at this point in time is that we all move into that integrated level of consciousness. And the more we move along that spiral and the awakenings compound themselves, the momentum builds for more intensity of the expression of the true self, right? But the question is, what do I mean by true nature? And I cannot tell you the answer to that, or I can share it, but it doesn't replace the direct experience exploration. So I invite you into that as you're listening. And hand in hand with the direct realizations at the cellular level, at the mind level, at the level of the heart, at the level of the movement of what is self, coupled there, by definition, has to be sovereignty, levels of sovereignty. And with each realization that then gets integrated and embodied, the experience and definition of sovereignty evolves. So there's a lot of discussion around what is sovereignty, but it's dependent on the direct realization of the level of the self, because sovereignty and knowing what you are go hand in hand, right? There are some key subjects that come to challenge our levels of sovereignty so that we can be thorough in the realization of the self and thorough in the expression of that sovereignty. And I want to talk about one of those topics today because it's interesting and important. And it's coming up. You know, I'm working at the foundations of consciousness with a group of people and myself. Really, the possibility of forgetting that true self is diminished until it will be completely squashed in this place, you know, so that the self is completely fulfilled through the expression of the body and the environment and the mind and the emotions. And that topic is parasitic consciousness. So this is one of those subjects that really has the capacity to take us all the way home. And that's the beauty of it. We can come in contact with parasitic consciousness. You know, parasitic consciousness is the engagement of one entity to another from a place of lack. And that lack drives us to gain whatever we feel we're lacking within another entity, within a situation or an environment, a person. But oftentimes we are unwilling or incapable of experiencing our own lack. So, in the goodness of the structure of the creation, the creation shows us our lack consciousness, our own capacity to parasitize through the engagement of other, the experience of other, whether that is astral parasite or a bully or a relationship that drains you, like psychic attack or these are examples, right? And there are mundane examples, of course. First of all, being parasites themselves, physical parasites, worms, amoeba, anything that's taking your energy, whether that's your blood, your tissue, your focus, your attention, and there's not a reciprocation. So there's a sucking dry, and there's a lack of meeting and return in that engagement, right? Right now, we can see this on large scales, and it appears, the way that it appears in relationship is often authority. The subject of authority. That's coming back to sovereignty, right? Like, who do I depend on? Who am I giving my authority away to? Who am I counting on to tell me how to move and how to be and what's acceptable? That's really hot right now. I was listening to the President of the United States last night giving his address to the nation and to the world in relationship to new mandates coming. And what resounds still in my awareness is his words, I have the authority. I have the authority. And I thought, wow, that's so amazing. He's declaring the authority. He's declaring that him as an individual has authority over the whole nation to command and action. And it's blatant, right? It's going to challenge our consciousness. Does someone else have the authority to tell you how to move in the world? And how do we respond when someone declares that they have the authority? Because it's an opportunity to visit what comes up in ourselves. And if there is any lack, yeah. So the way that I work with that is when I hear something like that, I notice what's happening in me. Do I get angry? Do I have thoughts about him as a person? You know, what's happening in my body? What kind of physical sensations do I have? What kind of energy movement is appearing? The thoughts, the emotions, everything is allowed. I really take the opportunity to turn away from the president in this case and come to myself and be with myself, sit with myself. With that backdrop of stillness or silence or the absolute unmanifest, the unknowable. There can be different words for it depending on where you are in your own exploration of that aspect of consciousness. And of course, the exploration of the experiencer is paramount in that, because there's all the qualities of the experience, right? And then when there's a settling there, because as the acceptance is brought in, there will start to be the unification of the psyche happens wherever unification was previously lacking, right? And that the unification closes the gaps in the psyche. It closes the deficiencies. It corrects any capacity that we have for parasitic consciousness. So the experiencer is the crux. It's the linchpin for that whole coming together. If we look directly to the experience of self and allow it to have its subjective experience, not only of the sensory, the physical sensations, the emotions, what it sees, the visions, having its experience of the stillness or the absolute, that there is an entity there that's creating an experience. And we want to explore the qualities of that entity, right? When that entity is in separation, it will have one qualities, it will have one perspective on the world, it will have one perspective on someone saying, I have the authority. And when consciousness comes back into unification and or it remembers its source, it remembers that its whole experience is an aspect of its consciousness and therefore aligns with source, so that the qualities of the experience are also source, you could say. The anger, the judgments, the thoughts, the meat, the flesh. It's really that one when it remembers its source. And in the remembering, so on the path to that remembering, I'm looking at, let's say I'm visiting this. I have the authority, and all my reactions that come up to that. Well, the experiencer has a chance to, in the acceptance and allowance, the depth of acceptance can become so complete that there is a surrender, a willingness to let go of everything it's ever experienced and everything it's ever been. And it's through that willingness that the dawning of what is actual about the self awakens there and burgeons into the qualities of the experience, into the emotions, the movement, the thoughts. And that burgeoning is the correction of our own capacity to engage with the creation through lack. And of course, as we correct that, or the self begins to fulfill its own holes, let's say, and that parasitic consciousness is corrected, the outer world, or what's experienced at first as the outer world, doesn't need to show us anymore a reflection of that deficiency, right? So the world begins to appear differently simultaneously as the perception appears differently, because you are different. Our response to someone saying, I am the authority, becomes one of creativity and self-fulfillment. Imagine that. Someone coming with the force of control and tyranny And in the face of their movement, there can just be creativity and self-fulfillment. And the embodied movements of the expression of that will look different in each moment, right? So there's no formula, there's no way that can be formalized, strategized. The nature of it is spontaneous, like a martial artist, right? The martial artist doesn't know what move is coming next. It has to be so utterly surrendered, or they, him, her, has to be so utterly surrendered that when the attack comes, the response is spontaneous and pre-thought, pre-conceptual, pre-movement even. This is really the way to become the martial artist within life, I would say. It's over the years I have worked with parasitic consciousness. The way that I've talked about it, I like to use the term outside influence. Because first of all, because it's not a scary term, outside influence, whereas other terms can be scary. I know Paul Levy calls it Wedico. And it's really a disease of the mind that is sourced from the deficiency to connection to our own source, right? So where we lack connection to our source, the mind will show a distortion of the actuality, and therefore it creates a distorted world. And that's the beauty of the place that we're in, because it's through this mechanism that we get to remember and realize what we actually are, which to me is a fun exploratory adventure, even in the times where it doesn't feel fun at all, where it's difficult and challenging and torturing even at times. Then when we encounter evil, so over the years, and I've written about this, I'm sure some of you have read about it, there are different ways, depending on the levels of the realization of the self, there are different ways to engage with parasitic consciousness. But the bottom line is, I always refer back to myself, When I was in my shamanic training, I started to experience parasitic consciousness as bugs, kind of in the unseen realms. They were crawling on my skin and slithering all around, and I would experience them inside my body, and I had a lot of reaction to that. And so I would just use it to heal my reaction. And as I did, they went away. They dissolved. And over time, I began to realize they are actually, those bugs, that parasitic consciousness, which extended into my relationships and my experience of people parasitizing me, or me parasitizing people when I was eventually more open to seeing that. I recognized that this was my own projection. It was my own way to project pain out so that I didn't have to feel it. To project that deficiency, the experience of deficiency can come with shame and difficult emotions that are hard for us to experience. So if I'm not willing to go through the darkness, or I don't like to use the word darkness because darkness has other connotations for me that are related to yin energy, but difficult, challenging emotions. If I'm not willing to go through those in myself, I'm going to project them out. So any deficiency that I have that I'm not willing to experience in myself is going to appear as an astral parasite, or someone in my environment that's claiming that they have control over me, for example. So I began to work with them and noticed as they dissolved, it was like, wait a minute, I'm creating this. It's not real. It's illusion. And then I realized it's illusion that's appearing based on the self, the illusory experience of the self. They are an illusion because I'm an illusion. What is real? What is me? What is illusion? What is true? What is I? Here, there. Is there any separation between inner and outer? The experience of outside influence then shifts into there is no outside and there is no inside. They are one. I'm also amazed to see how the discussion around parasite and parasitic consciousness right now is coming to the fore. And I'm happy that it is. It's coming to the fore in relationship to a very particular kind of treatment against the pandemic, or within the pandemic, I should say, the pandemic as a field of consciousness. So without going into the words that will activate things that might get this video taken down, for example. Speaking of parasitic consciousness, there are treatments that are being discussed as anti-parasitic that are effective against COVID. That is the offering being put out there. And because of that offering, and because people are noticing that there is a treatment that works, then now I'm noticing a lot of my friends, for example, saying, oh, this is working. This is healing. This is keeping people from getting super sick. It's keeping people from going to the hospital. And I have never used that or have had the need to use that particular treatment. But I'm not surprised, because as soon as we recognize that the whole discussion around the pandemic, whether it's political or physical, it's all related to parasitic consciousness and the challenge to sovereignty. The challenge meaning, let's meet the challenge. Let's meet this challenge. And the self can fill its own holes. And when the self fills its own holes, that is the ultimate healing. It's the ultimate anti-parasite cleanse. It's the ultimate parasite cleanse, is the filling of those holes. So, when I first got into natural healing, which was the late 90s, one of my entrances to that was Dr. Hulda Clark, and she was very focused on healing cancer through, one of the ways that she was doing that was getting rid of parasites. So I went through a phase in my life, and I have done over years of doing these parasite cleanses, herbal parasite cleanses. And what I can absolutely say now is great. there are some health benefits to doing those parasite cleanses, but unless you couple it with addressing the linchpin, moving into the most vulnerable places of our own deficiency, and the doorways into the subtle deficiencies are the gross deficiencies. I'm not good enough. I suck. The comparisons that we have towards other people, self-judgment, lack, specifically any place of self-lack. Even I don't have enough money. I don't have what I need. I'll never get a man that meets me. There's a million different phrases that can go with the experience of lack. Excuse me. When you move into the subtler levels of where consciousness is birthing itself, in the highest level of refinement, those deficiencies can appear in very, very subtle ways, in ways that we may not have seen before. So we need to just be open and sense and feel what deficiency is like there. It can be a lack of the capacity to breathe. A lot of times in people, I experience it like, I can't get enough oxygen. I can't breathe. I can't see. Sometimes it appears in levels of the absolute where the witness, ultimately the rooting out of this deficiency is work between the witness and the unmanifest. And as long as there is a witness who has a capacity to experience something outside of itself, then it's going to show a deficiency. This is really subtle, advanced meditative work. So when you get to the level of the witness, which is the purest, most refined level of awareness that has the capacity to be objective, to look, to experience itself as an object, and to objectify other things in consciousness, to objectify both the sensory and the non-sensory. As long as that exists, there will be a lack of self-fulfillment. And when that witness has the willingness to let go of everything that it's ever been, and or when it realizes its own illusory nature, then what remains has the opportunity to fulfill all the holes that actually originated between the witness and the absolute or the unmanifest. And the filling of those holes extends into the whole manifestation. At this point, the paradigms, all the old paradigms just collapse. Like the yin yang, or the masculine and feminine in separation, they're transcended through their complete union without the capacity to experience themselves as separate anymore. This is when all of the polarities collapse, not in non-duality, but in totality. There is the totality in the continual, moving, fulfilling, spontaneous expression without beginning and without end. There is no capacity to be parasitized in that case when that is fulfilled, and that is where we're going. So this is our constant work. It's our opportunity to move in that direction and to gain a greater and greater level of integrity. The substance that's built through that work becomes so integrous, because all the holes are filled, right? So space changes as well, because in order to have a hole or a lack, there has to be space or something missing in space, right? So when that's not possible anymore, we're talking about paradigm shifts that are we haven't experienced that in our lifetime. So we don't know where we're going. That's why the witness, that's why the subtlest level of awareness needs to have the willingness to give up everything it's ever been, so that this thing that it hasn't known can birth itself, can come into play, can create the play. That is the lila, the play of consciousness. So I wanted to share this today because it feels really important right now in our time. I was talking to a friend yesterday, a close friend of mine, and that I can meet with intimately in discussions like this. And he was sharing with me, I haven't been even talking to him about this, but I called him up yesterday and he's like, I realized that parasitic consciousness is everywhere and I need to correct that in my life. And I said, I was just going to make a video on this. So we had a good discussion on it yesterday. And he was giving the examples of how it appears in his life. And they really struck me as important, because the mundane and the practicality, the practical ways that this occurs is important to know, right? And he was talking about people calling him and wanting something, and then never really offering anything in return. And the reason that he showed up for that in the past, his own kind of feeling self-righteous and wanting to help and be there for the people. And how that's actually, before in his mind, it was like, I'm showing up, this is me doing a good work. This is me like making a contribution and being of service. But the person was just using his energy, right? And then just with this exploration, he realized, I have to correct this. So he doesn't answer the phone anymore when this person calls. And then the person emailed and said, are you getting my calls? Have you changed your number? And he hasn't responded to the email. And if he sees them out, he's just going to say, no, I'm not responding to you anymore because you're not reciprocating. So I was just appreciative of his practical examples that he was sharing with me. One of the ways that this has come up for me in my life is around proper use of energy and noticing just where energy is leaking. When I'm engaging with someone, is their energy building, or am I losing energy? And if so, instead of looking at the person and thinking it's their problem, I look back at myself and I go, what's happening that I'm leaking energy here, and what wants to realize itself, so that the correction can be natural and spontaneous. Yeah. So these are exciting times because I feel like the exploration is in our face, it's in our face. And this is good because it has the capacity to take us completely home if we're diligent and sincere in our inner investigation, in our willingness to surrender and willingness to see and feel and experience. It can take us all the way home to something outside. Something, it's the experience of the self that has no tendency for lack, no tendency to be parasitized or to parasite something else. And it's also the way for physical health to create itself. So all those problems with physical parasites, the microbiome, whether we like it or not, worms and things that we think of parasites are part of the microbiome. Well, what if we live in harmony with them? What if they are there and they don't create disease and there's no need to expel them because we've corrected our own consciousness? To me, that's the possibility of where we're going. And I wanted to share that because it feels like powerful medicine. It's powerful medicine that I'm seeing actualize in the people that I'm working with, and specifically ones that I'm working with in the initiation that I call the Immaculate Conception of the Self, which is really the conscious creation of the self. It's a mastery that appears through the integration of the Ida and the Pingala and the Sushumna, the complete union of Shiva and Shakti, or masculine and feminine, as an expression of self-fulfillment. I really feel like we're all going there in this time, walking our own unique paths to getting there. So I'm delighting in the community that's doing that, whether you're doing that with me or in your own way or with other people. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all of us who are taking this opportunity of the heightened craziness of our times and using it as the portal into the Homo Luminous, the new human. Thank you. May you be blessed. Namaste and all my love.